About a year ago, in 2015, Freedom Scooter of Zephyr Hills, Florida was contracted by the VA for the installation of a ramp for my electric scooter. 1 year later, in January 2016, the lowest section of the ramp collapsed. In preparation for the installation of this wheelchair ramp at my home, the VA subcontractor, Freedom Scooter, visited my home to take measurements and decide what pieces and parts would be required for the installation. A few weeks later, the contractor returned to my home and began work on the ramp. I live in a triple wide manufactured home with about 2 feet of vinyl skirting around the entire home. The first thing the contractor did was remove the existing wooden ramp which we had installed a few years prior. The contractor arrived at my home about 2 p.m. and stayed until after 8 p.m. that evening. The sun set at about 6 p.m., so the contractor worked and complained non-stop for over 2 hours using electrical lights. The work was done in a completely unsatisfactory manner by Freedom Scooter. Several used parts were installed. If indeed the VA paid for all new parts, the government has quite simply been defrauded. This ramp consists of a 5 by 5 foot landing at the top of the ramp. Used parts were used for this install. Holes had been drilled into the aluminum platform to accommodate a previous installation. 4 interlocking sections of ramp. Used parts were employed for 3 of the 4 sections. A transition piece at bottom of the ramp. This piece is laid on the ground and lifted up slightly to connect with the actual ramp. 8 handrails. The lowest section of ramp is missing end caps at the end of the tubular handrails. This creates a hazard for any individual while using the handrails. When walking up or down the ramp, a person's hand could easily slide into the exposed, unprotected portion of the handrail that is missing its end cap and cut or otherwise damage their hand. The interconnecting sections of ramp and landing are intended to be bolted together. 3 of the 4 ramp sections are bolted to the adjacent ramp and/or landing. The lowest section of the ramp, however, is not bolted to the adjacent section, as are the other 3 sections of angled ramp. This obviously results in a less than stable construction. When the subcontractor disassembled the original wooden ramp, they removed a section of my vinyl skirting. I repeatedly informed the contractor that this skirting needed to be reinstalled. His retort was simply, "I don't do vinyl skirting. You can simply contact another contractor who does do vinyl skirting." This is completely unacceptable. Numerous screws and nails were left exposed and protruding from pieces of lumber when the ramp was taken apart by the subcontractor. Rather than remove the original wooden ramp, the entire pile of debris was left on my property for me to dispose of. The 4 by 4 wooden uprights used to hold up the original ramp were merely sawed off several inches above the ground level and left for me to dig up and dispose of. Part of the new installation required using a sawzall to cut several of the aluminum pieces. Metal filings and shavings were left scattered on the ground by the subcontractor. I insisted that these sharp and dangerous shards of metal be removed. I informed the subcontractor that I have 3 small dogs, and I was concerned they might step on the sharp metal and cut their feet. Dave Buddha, one of the partners of Freedom Scooter, retorted, "If one of your dogs gets cut, I will pay for the vet." The subcontractor's unacceptable solution was to simply sprinkle a few handfuls of sand and dirt around and upon the metal shavings. The correct solution would have been to use the dust buster, which I offered to the sub. I wanted him to sweep up the shavings. The lowest piece of the ramp, referred to as a transition, connects the lowest section of ramp to the ground. This transition piece was never installed correctly. After securing this part, dirt should have been shoved under the transition to support the weight of an electric scooter plus a person. This was never done. Even though I verbally complained to Dave Buddha, my words were ignored. At approximately 8 p.m. in pitch dark, the subcontractor stated they were finished and wanted me to sign paperwork stating the work had been done to my satisfaction. I informed the subcontractor that I would need to see the finished work in the daylight before I could make any commitment of my satisfaction. The subcontractor belligerently threatened to dismantle the ramp and call the police. The subcontractor and my wife got into a shouting match. I told my wife to go into the house and let the subcontractor do whatever he wanted to do. I would not sign anything before I had inspected the work in the daylight. I told my wife I was going into the house and I wanted her to do the same. I then went into the house. My wife broke into tears, and under duress, she signed the contractor's paperwork. The next part, although it does not directly impact me, is dangerous. The sub had 2 young boys working for him. It was very obvious these boys knew nothing about tools or construction. The subcontractor, Dave Buddha, in a teaching manner, showed the boys how to replace the cutting blade in an electrical sawzall reciprocating saw without unplugging the saw.
Today, coming down the ramp in his scooter, he turned one way, and just like he would turn, and this bottom of the ramp slipped off. I was looking for, this is bent right here. Inadvertently the scooter caught a hold of that, but I was looking for the connections, and apparently this bottom section was not connected. There are no connectors. You can see there's holes here, but there are no bolts where we can connect it back. There's a connections hole here and a hole here where it goes, but there was nothing connecting it. It was simply floating in place.